Hey, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good evening to everyone. Welcome to another webinar organized by the Hashim Sani Center for Palestine Studies. And tonight we are going to discuss the topic Palestine shackles are other shackles. Actually, it's based on an article written by our guest for tonight's webinar, Mr. Tong Wen Wai. Welcome, Mr. Tong, to our webinar. Before we proceed, let me introduce you to the audience. Mr. Tong is a longtime member of Aliran Kesedaran Negara or Aliran, and he's a part of a Palestine Solidarity in Penang. He is an engineer retired from a global multidisciplinary consulting firm. And he has been engaging in the issue of Palestine and its related aspects for quite a while now. And he's also involved in other issues on social justice. And after October 7, he told me that after October 7 and its genocidal aftermath, he became more invigorated to advocate for the cause of Palestine, and which is continuing until today. And he is very concerned about the issue of justice and also against imperial or injustice committed by imperial forces, you can say. And he is very involved in the cause. He writes, and one of his articles, which we are going to discuss tonight, that is the title of this article, which was published by the Rakyat Post, Palestine Shackles, Everyone Shackles. And he wears Free Palestine badges, organizes stands on the roadside in Penang, and also sometimes get into arguments with people who do not understand the issue of Palestine. And welcome, Mr. Tong again. Tom, many prominent Malaysians who speak on the issue of Palestine are Malay Muslim, you can say. You are among the few non-Muslims who are very vocal in supporting the cause of freedom, justice, and equality in Palestine. Can you please share with us how you became involved in this issue and why you decided to become an activist? Go ahead.
Thanks, Prof, and thanks for this invitation to this event. So, yeah, it's true that many Malaysians, and it's quite visible, that speak about Palestine, Malay, Muslim Malaysians, that's the majority. And I must say that even when the government organizes large gatherings to take a stand and make a voice, the posters that the organizers prepare are also very Malay and Muslim looking. And unfortunately, to my mind, that, kind of dichotomizes the issue unnecessarily because as you know very well, the issue has practically nothing to do with religion and ethnic divisions, but because in Malaysia we have a certain level of communal separation, polarization, we then, I suppose, project our own separations onto the issue, and I suspect as a Chinese Malaysian that many Chinese Malaysians, when in the first place many don't know the issue, and at the same time when they see that it is an issue which is primarily in the majority fashion involved in by Malay Muslim Malaysians, the knee-jerk reaction is they distance themselves, and that of course makes it doubly difficult for people to get to know and understand the issue. But as far as I'm concerned, it is an issue which really it has to do with bullying, and none of us likes to see people getting bullied, regardless of your religion or ethnic background. None of us likes that, and that's just basic human instinct that just goes against that. And because I've read about and been in the process of understanding the whole issue of Palestine for a number of years, and I know how it is fundamentally it's a deep historical injustice for different reasons. A group of people in Palestine, the natives, they are caught in the whirlwind of imperial powers, as well as Christian Zionism, as well as Islamophobia. A number of things come together, and then they become victims of a long, deep historical injustice, and then they get bullied, they get dispossessed, and it continues to this very day. So that is a strong case of victims being bullied, and that to me strikes a chord. And I therefore, as a Malaysian, recognize that we need to do something, but I also recognize that as a Chinese Malaysian, I also need to try and do my little bit of raising the profile of the non-Malay bit of the oppositional stance against the dispossession of Palestinians.
Okay. Yeah. It's very easy to find non-Muslims in non-Muslim countries like America and Europe. Of course, being active in the cause of Palestine. Even in Singapore, we can see a lot of non-Muslims, Chinese, Indians, who are very active, actually, who are very brave to voice out their support for Palestine, also against the policy of Singapore, for example. Right? They were even willing to take the risk of going to jail. But in Malaysia, because of local politics, as you mentioned just now, it becomes a barrier for some non-Muslims to understand the issue. Can you please share with us, with the audience, how you are able to overcome it? Is it because you were exposed to this when you were overseas, or because when you are in Malaysia and you are caught up with local politics, it's not easy to disassociate Malay Muslim with the issue of Palestine? Can you please elaborate how you are very different from most non-Muslims?
Yeah, so I'm not sure to what extent I'm different, but in as far as my own journey is concerned, I think it has to do with keeping yourself informed and asking questions. Everything starts with the mind. As human people, everything starts with the mind, where but to be more precise, with the heart and the mind. If you ask the right questions and your heart is in the right place, regardless of what you are, and because you ask the right questions, then you look for the information, you look for the knowledge, you get the understanding. And in my case, I did have a strong interest in religion, the various spiritual traditions in previous years, and the time that was spent self-educating in the different traditions provided a wider, open, more universalistic stance, which then leads to another opening of the mind to issues which are not then constricted by sectarian thinking. So I guess in my case, it has a lot to do with asking the right questions and having the heart in the right place, in the sense of not liking to see people getting trampled upon.
Now, your recent article published by the Riot Post, Palestine Shackles are other shackles. Can you please explain to us your basic argument?
Yeah, so I've been, of course, like people like yourselves, looking at all the developments that's been going on, and it goes from one thing to another, one little chapter to another, each chapter devastating. And I then thought to myself that, there are certain things, imperial dominance, together with militarized violence, things of that sort, which have enabled the grabbing of Palestine, together with the, in parallel, dispossession of the native Palestinians for more than 100 years. things of that sort, imperial dominance and militarized violence, are also in use, evident to us in now in Iran, in Venezuela, in Lebanon, and in a host of other places. So I started to see, and as I'm sure many people would have, the parallels. And the argument, therefore, is that the oppression and gangsterism, world-class gangsterism, I must say, we can be world-class in many things. We can be a world-class musician, we can be world-class in athletics, or world-class researcher in some field or other. But unfortunately, this we're talking about here is world-class gangsterism, rude, crude leaders engaging in world-class gangsterism, placing shackles that are placed on weaker countries by hegemons like the United States and Iraq and Israel, and the Zionist state of Israel, I must be more precise. These shackles that are placed on weaker countries are shackles which are on Palestine, but which we also find on a number of other places. So I started to see those parallels. But for me, there's a bit of difference in the sense that Palestine, it brings together the various strands of imperialism. So, for example, colonialism is going on, and that's part of imperialism, and settler colonialism is going on in Palestine under the foot of the Zionist state of Israel. There is brutal violence brought on by overwhelming power. So that's another aspect of imperialism that's also there in the case of Palestine. There is also dispossession of natives, even the genocide of natives, which is also there in the case of Palestine. There is white supremacist racism, which is also there in the case of Palestine. So for me, what makes a difference for me in the case of Palestine is it brings together all these strands into one. And these strands, to some extent or other, may not all be there, but in various ways, these strands can be found in the case of many other places. So it therefore follows logically that in the case of Palestine, where all these strands are present, if you start to unravel that thread that goes through Palestine and which goes through other places, you then start to unravel that imperialist threat of control and dominance in other parts of the world. So that's basically the approach I was taking.
Okay. So you think the way you see this is, in other words, imperialism being imposed upon other parts of the world, and Palestine is actually the best example of it. You can say, right, the best manifestation of it, or the worst manifestation of it. You can say, I don't say the best, the worst manifestation of it, and therefore this current episode of Trump doing what he's doing now is simply one small part of it. Right? It's actually because some people get excited and get carried away with what Trump is doing, and forget that actually this is a story that goes very, very long way, and this got to do with not what Trumpism but rather imperialism, right? Can you please elaborate on that? Because other people got carried away with what Trump is doing. They think that when Trump is gone, then maybe things can get better.
Yeah, it is such a long and unfortunate unfolding story that, as you correctly pointed out, has been going on for such a long time. And that's one of the problems, isn't it? I mean, when I was younger and when I didn't understand things well, as with many people now, I would always associate the Middle East or rather West Asia um, with constant problems. The problems never change. They are always fighting, and then we just kind of wave it away, and we don't put any effort into understanding it because, and that kind of waving away is a way for it makes it easy for us to disregard. Makes it easy to turn around and walk away, and then just carry on doing our stuff. But you're right. What Trump said, was it yesterday or day before yesterday, that he would bomb, that if Hormuz wasn't open, that he would bomb Iran back to the Stone Age, where they belong. That I thought was so contemptuous and so condescending by a person who is so crude, so vulgar, and yet it kind of represents what has been going on because it is that kind of better than you attitude. It is that kind of superior attitude underpinned by superior overwhelming force that enables the bully to be the bully. The attitude of being superior, for example, is also underpins the transatlantic slave trade, where for, mind you, 400 years, my God, for 400 years, 10 to 12 million Black Africans were transported across from the west coast of Africa to the Americas in order to serve plantations, capital, in a triangular trade from Europe, Africa to the Americas. And what underpinned that? What underpinned that? A lot of that has to do with what I mentioned earlier on, white supremacist racism. I actually took the trouble to jot down a few quotations, if you will,
Go ahead.
that might draw the line between that line of white supremacist racism through to Zionist Israel and through to what Trump is doing today in Iran. So one of the things that I said in the article was, what Trump and his cabinet clones, what Netanyahu and his cabinet clones are doing in Iran today, Iran just being the latest sort of the latest example, is disgraceful. It is disgraceful from the point of view that it does not serve the West's own loftier ideals. The West is not all bad. It is not all white supremacist. The West has got lofty ideals as well, and that is part of the attraction of the West because there are aspects of it which are universalist, which are egalitarian, and that's why there are people around the world who will find an appeal to a certain Western ethos. But at the same time, it's not just all that. There is also white supremacist racism, and one of the foundations, one of the cornerstones of that was the Enlightenment of the 17th and 18th century Europe. And yet there are icons from the Enlightenment who were fountainheads of white supremacist racism, and yet they were seen. They are icons. So, for example, let me read to you. This is from Immanuel Kant, Germany. He says the yellow Indians, by which he means Asians, yellow Indians, square bracket Asians, do have a meager talent. So Prof, you and I have a meager talent. And then here the quote is, but the Negroes are far below them. So he places the Negroes below the Asians, the yellow Indians. And then he says, at the lowest point are a part of the American peoples, the Native Americans. So it's got that hierarchy. You and I, we are here, and then it's what you call Negroes, and then it's the Native Americans right at the bottom. But guess who's right at the top? Well, he says the white race possess all the motivating forces and talents in itself. So the white race to him is right at the apex, containing all that you need in terms of the motivating forces that you need to do whatever you want and all the talents of everything that allow you to forge ahead. So that's an icon of the Enlightenment in Europe. Let me read you another one. What about England? John Locke. He believed that Negroes were the product of African women sleeping with apes and therefore were subhuman.
This is John Locke.
Disgusting. Really, really disgusting. But then it helps to explain how then they can transport, as I said, 10 to 12 million Africans across the Atlantic, 1 to 2 million of whom died before they ever reached anything, in chains in horrid conditions, to become chattel slaves when they reached the plantations, if they reached the plantations. Things like that explain how they were able to do it because they were seen as subhuman, just as the Zionist Israelis see the Palestinians as subhuman, which brings to mind another quote from Winston Churchill in more recent times, where he referred to Palestinians as the dog in the manger, that even though they are native to the land, he sees them as a dog in the manger because you don't deserve to be there, and other people who are better than you should be there, and you're a dog in a manger, therefore you should get out. So it's really, really horrible, condescending, insulting things. And what about the US, America, Thomas Jefferson? He believed that the black people are, quote, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both mind and body. So that's the thing. There is this thread that you can draw from that racist fountainhead of the European Enlightenment, or at least a part of it, through to just 2 days ago when Trump thinks it is within his rights to say to another people where he thinks they belong, which is the Stone Age. Now, in between that and that is Zionist Israel. I already mentioned earlier on, today's Zionist Israel, what they're able to do to Palestinians is very much because they also see Palestinians as subhuman, as quote human animals, their former defense minister, as pests, grasshoppers to be crushed under the feet. And many of us know that famous quote from the famous words from Golda Meir, the former prime minister of Israel, that what keeps her awake at night is the thought of the Arab babies being born. So it's full of that kind of racism, and it's a white supremacist type of racism. But it didn't start with Golda Meir. It didn't start with Winston Churchill. It didn't start with Netanyahu. It started, of course, with the hatching of political Zionism, the nationalist ideology of Zionism in the late 1900s. And there itself, the founder of political Zionism, Theodor Herzl, what did he write? He wrote in 1896, we should form part of a wall of defense for Europe in Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. Again, the same kind of thing. Asia, the black, brown, yellow people, they are lesser, they are barbarians. You need an outpost of civilization against civilization. In other places, it's described as the tropical villa in the jungle. and every now and then you need to mow the grass. So that's what he writes. Now, he founded political Zionism, which led to, of course, the unfortunate events of Palestine, the dispossession of Palestinians. And what drove him to do that, get out of Europe and then set down roots in Palestine, was his experiences of anti-Semitism. His anti-Semitism experience in Europe. And yet, when he goes to Palestine, he sees himself as the wall of defense for Europe in Asia, the outpost of civilization against barbarians. So he takes on that white supremacist racism, even though he experiences anti-Semitism in Europe, but he takes on in that kind of vicarious fashion. And he carries on with that whole threat of white supremacist racism. And what happens in February? The Indian Prime Minister Modi, he made a visit to Israel, and he made a speech to the Israeli parliament, the Knesset. And I also took the trouble to jot down some notes that I could read to you here. And what were the words that he used in his speech to the Knesset? He described Israel as a protective wall against barbarism.
This Modi.
There's no end to this. And what was Netanyahu's response to Modi's Knesset speech? India supports Israel because it understands that Israel serves a defensive wall against barbarism. And if any of you will go to Google and Google Netanyahu talking about barbarism, talking about fighting a war of civilization against barbarism, you'll find replete numerous instances. So that's what I'm saying. This thing about to your original question about imperialism and how it runs through. Well, one of the driving factors has been this white supremacist thing, which the present Prime Minister of Israel continues to carry the torch for, a horrid torch. And in Malaysia, our situation is not perfect, but we come from a country with traditions and cultures which are noble, and we can be informed by those traditions and cultures that enables us to take a position against racialized imperialism, and each of us, regardless of which community we come from, do something, say something, take a stand to try and make a little bit of difference.
Okay. We will discuss about the implication for Malaysians later on. But before this, I want to pick up the issue of racism and white supremacism. Because at the same time, we hear Netanyahu whenever there is an attack on a synagogue, for example, by white supremacists. So as we know, there are people who are anti-Jews in America and also in Europe. These are white supremacists who are very racist towards Jews. So he is saying, you guys, you Jews in Europe and America are not safe. You have to come to Israel to be safe. In other words, so now he is saying he represents the West and also to protect themselves against the barbarism. But at the same time, he's saying that the Jews are not safe in Europe and America. They should come and migrate. And the only safe place for them is actually Israel. That's his argument. So he is so these ideas, all these thoughts are very convoluted. They are very confusing mess of ideologies. How do you respond to that, Tom?
So there are some fundamentals which are very simple, and the complexity, I think, is also manufactured, because the more complex you think it is, the less inclined they are to put any effort to understand it and get to the simple basics. The fact remains that what Israel has been doing for 70, 80 years is exactly what makes Jews unsafe. You go to someone's home and you kick the person out, and you lock the person out, you take over the home, the person tries to come back in, you make yourself the victim. You call that person the terrorist, even though the person is fighting for his or her rights, and the families. That's the basic story. You have appropriated someone's home and land. Therefore, you must expect the native to resist and fight back, and that happens everywhere, including Palestine.
Yeah.
If you keep doing that and you don't tackle that fundamental problem, you don't allow them the right of return because you have kicked them out. You don't allow them equality, freedom, and the right to self-determination because you subject them to an apartheid system in Israel. If you don't solve those fundamental problems, and on the contrary, you keep creating wars, you keep killing people, and they never die down. They continue fighting you because their rights are still not restored to them. Then, of course, you create an impression of yourself as a Zionist Jew or even as a Jew. You create an impression in the minds of people all over the world that Jews are actually they relish violence. They can't get enough of violence and war. After the past 2+ years since coming up to 3 years since October 2023, one can say that most people in the world haven't met a Jew. If you're in the US, you probably have met a Jew, but most people globally haven't met a Jew. But given what has happened since October 7, I think that residual impression, thought, image that is now left in people's mind is that Jews, and I use that term in a very restricted way, Jews as in Zionist Jews, Jews are associated with violence, and you therefore actually tarnish your own image as a people. And given the fact that there is a long history of anti-Semitism, not in our part of the world, we as Southeast Asians have no business being anti-Semites, but there's a long history of anti-Semitism in Europe, and you create that whole impression of violence, then what do you expect? People will continue to see you in a very negative way, and you therefore pour fuel onto the fires of anti-Semitism. So the simple fact of the matter is, if you're really interested in being honorable to the values of the Judaic tradition, the real values of the Judaic tradition, which are noble, which are generous, which are peaceful, you would not continue in your endless cycles of armed violence and wars. You would actually sit down and look for ways to coexist in some way or other, but you would go to the negotiating table, you would talk seriously, especially when, over the decades, Palestinians in their various manifestations, whether it's Hamas, or the PLO or others, over the decades, they have made compromises. They have been prepared to make compromises because they've been prepared to negotiate. But every time negotiation comes and approaches anywhere near success, as we saw in the negotiations with Iran, you go and start another war. So that's the problem. That's the problem. Stop the wars, go for peace and coexistence, start talking.
Yeah. We know that they tried to kill the Hamas negotiator, right? When Hamas was negotiating in Qatar, they went and bombed the chief negotiator of Hamas. So that shows their attitude. Anyway, let's come to Gaza now. What are the similarities that you see? What's happening in Gaza with what is happening in Venezuela, in Iran, etc.?
Yeah. So well, the starkest thing I think is on the very first day of the attack on Iran, February 28th. They already started killing children. That's sick. That's really sick. They hit the school, and they killed more than 160 young girls, young schoolgirls, most of whom were between the ages of 7 to 12. And just as they had been killing children in Gaza, in addition to, of course, other civilians, women, men, elderly, etc. But in Gaza, of course, they killed children to the tune of 20,000. Not, that we just say it, 20,000 a figure, but it has to sink in. It has to sink in. It's not 20
Yeah.
children. It's not 20 children. It's not 2,000 children. It's, by God, more than 20,000 children. What kind of pathology is there that not only allows them, but actually drives them week after week, month after month, to keep doing it, knowing that they're doing it? And then they keep running up that kind of counter. There's something deeply wrong with the societal psychology of that place. So that's one clear parallel. And another one is total disrespect for international law. It's an illegal law, illegal war. It is totally against the UN Charter. And yet, and just as war crimes and total disregard for international law was manifested in Gaza and the wider Palestine, you find that here, and it comes and goes with impunity. You also find that, as with Gaza, they are destroying hospitals, residential blocks. In other words, civilians getting killed. They are destroying universities. The report is 30 universities have been attacked. They are killing, targeting, assassinating university professors, researchers with their research students. And this again is in a long history of targeted assassinations, which the Israeli regime has been committing for decades upon decades. And by the way, in one of those books that I read recently, I discovered quite interestingly that people like Ariel Sharon, another one of the rather vicious previous prime ministers, and possibly, and Netanyahu, I'm not quite sure, but possibly, and at least one other former prime minister, they used to belong to a unit in the IDF that was specialized in assassinations.
Yitzhak Shamir, I think you were referring to Yitzhak Shamir.
Shamir, yeah. Okay.
Shamir, yeah.
So and they carry on doing that. So they assassinate university professors and their research students, etc., in order to destroy intellectual capital. It's quite barbaric. So that's another parallel. So this use of crude, overwhelming military power that we have seen in Gaza, that we have seen in Iran and now in Lebanon, it is also the one that allows, in the case of Venezuela, for Trump to order the intrusion into Venezuelan territory and airspace, kill a number of people, and then kidnap and abduct the Venezuelan head of state. Again, the brutal battering ram of military force. And yet, military force is not the only way. It's not the only battering ram. It's not the only parallel that we see between Gaza and these other places. There are other ways in which they can do it. Murder by starvation and deprivation, for example. The blockade of Gaza, where Zionist Israel stopped the flow of food, power, fuel, medicine, medical equipment, tents, and anything that you need for basic survival. That led to starvation, and it makes people suffer, miserable, and die. So murder by starvation and deprivation is another parallel. And this leads to a wider parallel, which I mentioned in the article. I was citing the Lancet Global Health Journal from I think August last year, where there was this published study that gave a basis for an estimate of more than 30 million people, 30, more than 30 million people who have died since 1970 as a result of sanctions, unilateral sanctions by the United States, EU, on other countries. Again, another form of deadly bullying. They're not necessarily using brute force. They are using the force that they have, the political, the economic, of course, backed by military force that they have, and then they impose blockades. People can't do anything about it. The United Nations is quite helpless about it. And as a result of those unilateral sanctions, in excess of 30 million people die as a result of those sanctions. Now, in excess of 30 million is close to decimating the entire population of Malaysia. And where are these deaths? Where are the people that died? The people that died as a result of these unilateral sanctions are in Africa, Latin America, countries like Venezuela and Cuba included, Asia, including West Asia, which includes the sanctions on Iran. And so that's where people die as a result of these strong Western hegemonic countries and blocs of the US and the EU. And the Trump's more recent blockade, embargo against oil coming into Cuba, that has resulted in the breakdown of the power supply system, breakdown of the functioning medical healthcare system. You want to have an X-ray, you want to have an MRI, you need this medicine or that medication, you can't because you have no energy, no transport. And they continue doing that. So there are parallels all the way from Gaza, to Iran, to what the US and the EU have been doing through the spectrum of physical military violence, as well as massive death by means of sanctions. And one more thing. That Lancet journal study that I cited that found excess deaths of more than 30 million people. Guess what? 51% of that were children less than 5 years old. So again, the massive killing of children. The massive killing of children. So, Prof, there's something deeply sick and pathological and barbaric about this.
Okay. Now let's discuss a bit about Iran. We know it's an illegal war, it's an imperialist war. They want to impose their desire or their plans, whatever, regardless of what the Iranians want. But we also know that within Iran itself, there are people, I was reading an article in the BBC that says that there are people in Iran who are supporting the attack by America to Iran. There are now conflict going on inside families in Iran, but there are some who are opposed, who really are angry at the Americans for attacking them, and at the same time there are those who are saying they want this war to continue to topple the government of Iran. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah. So it is something about which I would speak carefully because I'm not Iranian. And you correctly point out that there would be a segment of Iranians, both within Iran as well as within the Iranian diaspora in other countries, maybe also in the West, who have seen the more draconian aspects of the Islamic Islamic Republic of Iran since 1979, who may have also either they themselves or their friends and family suffered or witnessed from those draconian aspects. No government, no system is perfect. There are always imperfections, and if there have been draconian aspects that result in a certain level of disaffection among Iranians, and to the level that they actually would, in some way, see an opportunity in what Israel and US are doing to Iran now as an opportunity to bring down the current government and possibly replace it with something else, possibly in the form of the son of the previous Shah, which could very well mean reinstating a Western-dominated imperial order, and in the previous reincarnation, it was a police state. But in spite of all that, they may still see that kind of opportunity is true. And because I'm not Iranian, and I cannot fathom what they themselves might have gone through, I would not be in a position to make a judgment as to what they might want to see unfold in Iran in the current circumstances. Nevertheless, as someone outside, I think that we can have opinions, and I have, in my limited way, an opinion based on what I see and what I think I know, which would be that if I were Iranian, and if I tried or thought in some way to work with the chaos that's going on, make use of what's being done by Israel and US, and in a way collaborate with that chaos in order to bring about a change in government, I would be very, very hesitant, because those are parties that have no sincerity. They have no obligation to values of democracy and self-determination. They are crude, as I said. They are vulgar. They use things. They use violence. They kill. They commit genocide, and they are complicit with genocide to the hilt. Why? How could I make any compromise with parties of that sort without having to think at the back of my mind, I'm making a deal with the devil? So I would be very careful in that position. I'm trying to put myself in that position. So as a non-Iranian and as an external observer, I would be very careful about making a Faustian bargain.
Okay, right. We're coming to the end of our discussion. We have a straightforward issue of racism, white supremacism, imperialism, and also which is embodied in Zionism in Palestine. But all this, how do we Malaysians should learn from it, and in addition to being activists and to contribute to the cause of freedom and justice and equality in Palestine, what else can us Malaysians do, and also reflect upon what's happening in the West Asia now?
I think the first thing is to get a proper understanding of things, to learn properly. You might see the sleeping Buddha behind me.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, on top of the tip of the
I'm not
cabinet.
Buddhist. My wife is. So we have a sleeping Buddha figurine.
Okay.
I don't practice any religion, but nevertheless, nevertheless, as far as Buddhism is concerned, there's this thing about having the right thinking, which then translates into having the right speech, and then translates into having the right action. Right thought, right speech, right action. So it starts with, I think, getting the right understanding of things, learning, getting our thinking right based on the right information, and that takes some effort. So not everyone is going to be in a position to do this. Not everyone is going to be even interested in doing it. But nevertheless, your question was to, as far as West Asia and or Palestine are concerned, what can Malaysians do? I think that the first thing to do is to get the right thinking and understanding, because that is the fundamental thing to sweep away our prejudices, our biases, our blind spots, our willful acts of ignorance. I mentioned earlier on how I'm quite sure that many Chinese Malaysians have a knee-jerk rejection of interest in the issue of Palestine because they see it as a Malay-Muslim issue. And that is the kind of knee-jerk sweeping away of an issue because of built-in prejudice and blind spots. So the way to sweep that away is get the right understanding. And there are things that you can read, and the things that you can numerous things on the internet that you can watch to get some the fundamentals, and hopefully that starts to wipe the dust away and talk to people, get more information, understanding, and as you gain in that, starts yourself talking about it with other people in order to instigate useful change. And as Malaysians, in particular, I think for non-Malay Malaysians, when we start talking about Palestine to fellow non-Malay Malaysians, we are already helping to break a barrier in their mind. Why are you talking about this when you're Chinese? I am talking about this as a human being. And if you want to look at me as a Chinese Malaysian, okay, I'm also talking about it as a Chinese Malaysian, because part of my tradition as an ethnic Chinese also tells me to be in sympathy, in solidarity with people that are suffering and being trampled upon and suffering and injustice, and you have to do something about that. So if you want to see me as Chinese talking about that, I'm talking to you as a Chinese in that tradition. So get the right thinking, get the right speech out, and once you gain a certain level of confidence, you can start doing certain things. You can join a group. You can reach out to fellow Malaysians who are Malays who are already involved in the whole solidarity action on Palestine. And by doing that, you not only help the cause of Palestine, but you also help create the bonds of commonality among Malaysians across our communal ethnic groups. And incidentally, I think that as far as our government is concerned, Palestine is like such an opportunity. If the government wants to create common bonds among the different ethnic groups, and the government already has such a strong position in solidarity with Palestine, present it, for God's sake, or goodness sake, present it as a human issue of justice, and not through that lens, predominant lens of Malays and Muslims in Malaysia, and widen the tent so that all the non-Malays, non-Muslims in Malaysia can be part of that tent, and then build a solidarity from there. You've got a golden opportunity, but no, we're not doing that. So anyway, that was just by the side. So right thought, right speech, right action, get involved, and in Penang, Kathy Sanchez, who is also one of the other mainstays of Palestine Solidarity Palestine Solidarity Penang, every fortnight, every 2 weeks, on the roadside at Gurney Drive. If you're from Penang, you know the roadside, the curb between Paragon Mall on one side and Gurney Plaza Mall on the other, we gather there every 2 weeks to physically show and voice our solidarity with Palestine. So that becomes a form of action. So start small, start in small steps, and then escalate.
All right. Thank you very much for your sharing, for sharing all your thoughts and information, analysis of what's happening in Palestine as well as what's happening in other parts of the world, and also helping us to understand this issue of imperialism and racism and white supremacism, and also how us Malaysians should approach the subject. Keep up the good work in Penang, you and Katie and others who are fantastic. You are doing much more than we are doing over here. Because we don't meet up every 2 weeks, once in a while we have a protest, but you are doing much more than us over here in KL. But good work. May God bless your efforts, or your people over there in Penang, Palestine Solidarity Penang. And we want to tell people also here who are watching that we are going to have another Sumut event, which you organized last time in Penang a few months ago, successfully. Sumut event which successfully explained the issue of Palestine to people in Penang. And thank you very much for helping to organize another one, hopefully in KL in May. And hopefully people over here will attend. It's going to be in KL as well as in University Malaya. Thank you, Gaeton. See you around, and inshallah we will have another discussion one day. Another discussion. Bye bye.
See you and thank you, Prof. Bye.